The vast expanse of space glittered with the cold light of distant stars, a stark contrast to the desolate, crumbling surface of Zithron Prime. Once the jewel of the Zythan Empire, the planet was now a shadow of its former glory, its cities reduced to rubble and its people scattered among the stars. At the heart of the ruins, in the dimly lit throne room of a half-destroyed palace, Queen Velora clung to life. Her once gleaming exoskeleton suit, a masterpiece of Zythan engineering that allowed her to move despite her paraplegia, was malfunctioning. Sparks flew from its joints as she struggled to send one final distress signal. Velora's fingers trembled over the console, her mind racing against time. Her people had turned their backs on her, labeling her a weak ruler unfit to lead. Her advisors, once trusted allies, had defected to the Vectha Coalition, a ruthless alliance determined to conquer the remnants of the Zythan Empire. Now, with the enemy closing in, she was alone. "Zythan High Command," she whispered into the communicator, her voice breaking. "This is Queen Velora. I request immediate aid, please." Static hissed in response. Velora's heart sank as the realization hit her: no one was coming. She was expendable, her value to the galaxy reduced to nothing more than a footnote in history. Her condition had always been a point of contention, with detractors claiming a paraplegic ruler could never embody the strength and dominance the Zythans revered. They didn't see her intelligence, her strategic mind, or her unyielding determination. All they saw was her broken body. But Velora wasn't ready to give up. Summoning the last reserves of her strength, she adjusted the signal frequency, broadening the transmission range. This time, her plea would reach across the galaxy, to anyone who might listen. On a distant human outpost orbiting the war-torn planet Ganymede, Dr. Ryan Hales sat in a cramped medbay, stitching up the wound of a young soldier. His hands worked methodically, his expression unreadable. Ryan was a man defined by his past, a combat medic who had seen too many lives slip through his fingers. The war between the alien factions had dragged humanity into its chaos, forcing soldiers like Ryan to serve on the front lines of conflicts they barely understood. "Try not to reopen the stitches," Ryan said, his voice gruff but kind. The soldier nodded weakly, gratitude flickering in his eyes. As Ryan packed up his medical kit, a sharp beep interrupted his thoughts. The base's communication system was picking up an unusual signal. Ryan frowned and moved to the console, curious. The garbled transmission cleared, revealing a voice, desperate, raw, and undeniably alien. "This is Queen Velora of the Zythan Empire. To any who hear this, I beg for your aid. My life, my people, depend on it." Ryan froze. He had heard of the Zythan Queen, the paraplegic ruler whose leadership had been dismissed by her peers. Her reputation was a mix of admiration and scorn, depending on who you asked. But what struck Ryan wasn't her status. It was the raw vulnerability in her voice. It reminded him of the countless wounded soldiers he had fought to save, their cries for help haunting his memories. The room fell silent as the message repeated. Other personnel in the medbay glanced at Ryan, uncertain. The official orders from Earth Command were clear. Humanity was to avoid entangling itself in the internal conflicts of alien empires. "Turn it off," a nearby officer muttered. "We don't have time for alien politics." But Ryan couldn't look away. He had spent years patching up wounds and sending soldiers back into battles they wouldn't survive. He had lost count of the lives he had failed to save. This time, he felt something stir within him, something he hadn't felt in years. "She's going to die," Ryan said quietly. "Not our problem," the officer replied. Ryan clenched his fists. "It is now." Stealing a ship from a military base wasn't easy, but Ryan's years of service had taught him how to exploit the system. With a forged clearance code and a hastily assembled plan, he slipped into the cockpit of a small transport vessel. The moment the hangar doors opened, his heart pounded in his chest. If Earth Command discovered what he was doing, he'd face court-martial, or worse. But the thought of Velora's voice, pleading for help, kept him going. The journey to Zithron Prime was treacherous. Ryan evaded patrols, dodged asteroid fields, and pushed the ship's engines to their limits. When the broken silhouette of the Zythan homeworld finally appeared on his view screen, he felt a surge of relief. He had made it. Descending through the planet's atmosphere, Ryan was struck by the devastation below. The once majestic cities were now wastelands, their towering spires reduced to twisted metal. Smoke billowed from the ruins, and the air crackled with the energy of distant battles. It was a graveyard, a haunting reminder of what war could destroy. The palace was easy to find, its remnants still towering over the desolation. Ryan landed the ship in a clearing and stepped out, his boots crunching against the ash-covered ground. He armed himself with a standard-issue sidearm and a medical kit, unsure of what he would face inside. As he entered the throne room, the sight before him took his breath away. Queen Velora lay slumped in her exoskeleton, her once regal form now frail and vulnerable. Her silver hair clung to her damp forehead, and her violet eyes fluttered weakly. The exoskeleton sparked and groaned, its power reserves nearly depleted. Ryan rushed to her side, his medical instincts taking over. "I'm here to help," he said softly. Velora's eyes flickered open, and she stared at him in disbelief. "A human?" she rasped. "Yeah," Ryan replied, pulling out his medical scanner. "You called for help. I'm answering." For a moment, Velora seemed to struggle with her pride. She had never expected a human, a species she had barely regarded as significant, to come to her aid. But as Ryan worked, his hands steady and his expression focused, she felt a flicker of hope. "The virus," Velora murmured. "It's killing me." Ryan frowned as he examined her. The readings were unlike anything he had seen before. The virus wasn't just biological, it was laced with nanotechnology, designed to disrupt her body and mind simultaneously. It was a weapon, a cruel masterpiece of bioengineering. "You're infected with something I've never seen," Ryan said. "But I'm not giving up on you." Velora's lips curved into a faint smile. "You're stubborn. You have no idea," Ryan muttered. As he worked to stabilize her, Velora began to tell him about the artifact, an ancient Zythan relic hidden in the mountains, rumored to neutralize even the most advanced pathogens. It was her only chance. "Then we'll find it," Ryan said firmly. Velora looked at him, her eyes shimmering with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "Why would you risk your life for me?" Ryan hesitated, memories of his past failures flashing through his mind. "Because no one else will." In that moment, an unspoken bond formed between them, a fragile alliance born of desperation and shared determination. Together, they would embark on a journey that would test their courage, reshape their destinies, and challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves. The galaxy may have abandoned its queen, but Ryan Hale hadn't. And he wasn't going to let her down. The wind howled across the barren wastelands of Zithron Prime, carrying with it the acrid stench of war. Ryan trudged forward, his boots sinking into the loose, ash-laden soil. Queen Velora sat in a makeshift stretcher rigged to his back, her frail body stabilized but far from healed. She was silent, conserving her strength as they moved toward the mountains where the ancient Zythan artifact was said to be hidden. Ryan's breaths came hard and fast as he navigated the treacherous terrain. His military training had prepared him for this level of exertion, but the weight of Velora and his own doubts bore down on him like an unseen force. "Why would anyone hide something so important out here?" he muttered, more to himself than to Velora. Velora's voice, though weak, held a trace of humor. "The artifact was placed in the mountains, as a last resort, a place no one would think to look." "Well, they succeeded in that," Ryan replied, adjusting the straps of the stretcher. "This whole place feels like the galaxy's graveyard." Velora didn't respond, her energy too precious to waste on small talk. Ryan glanced back at her, his brow furrowed with concern. The Queen's condition was deteriorating. The virus coursing through her veins was relentless, and despite his best efforts, he could only slow its advance. "We'll make it," he said, more to reassure himself than her. "Just hang on." The path to the mountains was fraught with danger. The Vector Coalition, Velora's enemies, had deployed drones to patrol the area, searching for any trace of her. Ryan's human ingenuity proved invaluable as he used his knowledge of field medicine and stealth tactics to evade detection. On several occasions, he rigged decoys using spare parts from his medkit, luring the drones away from their path. One evening, as they camped in the shadow of a rocky outcrop, Velora broke the silence. "You're different," she said softly, her violet eyes studying him. Ryan looked up from the portable heater he had set up. "Different how?" "You're kind, humans. You risk yourselves for reasons I don't understand. You could have left me. No one would have blamed you." Ryan poked at the heater, his expression unreadable. "Maybe that's why we're different. We don't need a reason to do the right thing." Velora smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of sadness. "On Zitharon, survival comes first. Even among allies, compassion is a rarity." Ryan met her gaze. "Maybe that's why they underestimated you. They don't see your strength." Velora didn't reply, but her silence spoke volumes. For the first time in years, she felt something other than despair. She felt seen. The journey grew more perilous as they approached the mountains. The once barren wasteland gave way to jagged cliffs and treacherous ravines. The thin atmosphere made breathing difficult, but Ryan pressed on, driven by an unyielding determination. On the third day, they encountered their first major obstacle, a massive chasm, too wide to cross and too deep to see the bottom. A rickety bridge stretched across it, its ropes swaying dangerously in the wind. "This just keeps getting better," Ryan muttered. Velora, strapped to the stretcher on his back, lifted her head weakly. "The bridge, it's ancient. It might not hold." Ryan examined the bridge, noting the frayed ropes and weathered planks. He had no choice. Turning back wasn't an option. "I'll go slow," he said. "Hold on tight." The crossing was harrowing. Each step felt like a gamble as the planks creaked and groaned under their weight. Halfway across, a gust of wind nearly threw them off balance. Ryan dropped to one knee, gripping the ropes tightly. "Don't look down," he muttered to himself. "You're insane," Velora said, though her tone held a hint of admiration. "Yeah, well, I've been called worse." They made it to the other side, both breathing sighs of relief. Ryan set Velora down to rest, his legs trembling from the strain. "Remind me to add bridge repair to my resume," he said, trying to lighten the mood. Velora chuckled weakly. "If we survive this, I'll make you my royal engineer." Ryan smiled, but the moment of levity was short-lived. A low hum filled the air, growing louder by the second. He scanned the horizon and spotted a group of vector soldiers descending the mountain path. "They found us," he said grimly. Velora struggled to sit up. "You need to leave me. They want me, not you." "Not happening," Ryan replied, pulling out his sidearm. "I didn't come all this way just to hand you over." The soldiers approached, their weapons trained on Ryan. Their leader, a towering figure clad in black armor, stepped forward. "Human," the leader growled. "You are trespassing on Vector territory. Surrender the Queen, and we may let you live." Ryan's mind raced. He was outnumbered and outgunned, but he had one advantage, the element of surprise. "I don't think so," he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. As the soldiers closed in, he activated a hidden device on his wrist, a flashbang improvised from his medkit. The blinding light and deafening noise disoriented the soldiers, giving Ryan the opening he needed. He moved swiftly, taking out 2 soldiers with precise shots before diving behind a boulder for cover. Velora watched in awe as Ryan fought with a combination of skill and ingenuity. He used the terrain to his advantage, setting traps and outmaneuvering the enemy. Despite the odds, he managed to neutralize the remaining soldiers, leaving only the leader. The Vector commander snarled, drawing a massive blade. Ryan stood his ground, his breathing ragged but his resolve unshaken. "You're brave," the commander said, circling him. "But bravery won't save you." Ryan smirked. "Maybe not. But it's a start." The fight was brutal. The commander's strength was overwhelming, but Ryan's speed and adaptability kept him in the fight. He used his surroundings to compensate for his lack of firepower, eventually disarming the commander and pinning him to the ground. "You made a mistake coming here," Ryan said, pressing his sidearm to the commander's head. "Now you're going to help us." The commander glared at him but ultimately yielded. Ryan forced him to provide information about the artifact's location and any traps awaiting them. As the sun set, Ryan and Velora continued their journey, leaving the defeated soldiers behind. Velora, still weak but filled with newfound admiration, spoke softly. "You're more than a medic," she said. Ryan shrugged. "I'm just a guy trying to do the right thing." "No," Velora said, her gaze unwavering. "You're a warrior." Ryan didn't respond, but her words stayed with him as they pressed on. For the first time, he began to believe he might actually be capable of more than just patching wounds. By the time they reached the entrance to the artifact's chamber, Ryan and Velora were exhausted but determined. The doorway was sealed with an intricate lock, its design ancient and unfamiliar. "Think you can open it?" Ryan asked. Velora studied the lock, her mind sharpening despite her physical weakness. "I'll need your help." Together, they worked to decipher the lock's mechanism, combining Velora's knowledge of Zythan technology with Ryan's problem-solving skills. After what felt like an eternity, the door rumbled open, revealing a dimly lit chamber. Inside, the artifact glowed with an otherworldly light, its presence both awe-inspiring and ominous. Velora's breath hitched as she gazed upon it. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Ryan approached it cautiously. "Let's hope it's as useful as it is pretty." As they prepared to activate the artifact, either of them noticed the shadowy figure watching from the doorway, a sinister smile playing across their lips. The real fight was just beginning. The chamber was eerily silent, the hum of the artifact casting an almost reverent atmosphere over the ancient space. Its crystalline structure pulsed with an otherworldly glow, reflecting a spectrum of colors onto the carved walls of the Zythan temple. Ryan stood at the artifact's base, his fingers brushing over its smooth surface as he tried to understand its design. Velora remained seated nearby, her condition visibly worsening despite their progress. The trek had taken a toll on her, and even with Ryan's medical interventions, the virus continued to sap her strength. She watched him work with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Can you activate it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan turned to her, his brow furrowed. "I don't know yet. The tech is advanced, way beyond anything I've seen, but it looks like it interfaces with biological input. I think it needs your genetic signature to work." Velora nodded weakly. "Then, let's not waste time." Ryan helped her to her feet, her body trembling under the weight of her own fragility. He guided her to the artifact, where a small, glowing panel seemed to await her touch. She pressed her hand against it, and the artifact responded immediately, emitting a series of melodic chimes as it began to power up. For a moment, the room filled with radiant light, and Ryan dared to believe they had succeeded. But the sudden sound of heavy boots against stone shattered the moment of triumph. The doorway to the chamber filled with armed figures, their weapons gleaming in the artifact's glow. Leading them was the Vector warlord, General Kaeldrak, a towering, reptilian alien with obsidian-black scales and glowing red eyes. He exuded a menacing aura, his presence commanding instant fear and respect. "Well, well," Kaeldrak sneered, his voice a guttural growl. "The elusive Queen Velora and her pet human. I must admit, I'm impressed you made it this far." Ryan stepped in front of Velora, his sidearm drawn. "Back off, Kaeldrak. You're not getting anywhere near her." Kaeldrak laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the chamber. "Brave words for someone so hopelessly outnumbered. Surrender now, and I may grant you a quick death." Ryan didn't flinch. "You're assuming I came here unprepared." Before Kaeldrak could respond, Ryan reached into his medical pack and threw a small device to the ground. A cloud of smoke erupted, filling the chamber with a dense, blinding mist. The Vector soldiers opened fire blindly, their shots ricocheting off the ancient stone walls. "Run!" Ryan shouted, grabbing Velora and pulling her toward a hidden alcove he had spotted earlier. They ducked behind a series of large, crystalline pillars, using them as cover. The smoke began to clear, and Kaeldrak roared in frustration. Find them! Secure the artifact! The soldiers spread out, their movements methodical. Ryan knew they wouldn't have much time before they were discovered. He quickly assessed the situation, his mind racing. Valora, he whispered. Can you still interface with the artifact remotely? She nodded faintly. If I can get close enough. I think I can disable its security measures. Good. Stay low and follow my lead. Ryan moved with precision, taking out 2 soldiers silently with his combat knife before they could alert the others. His military training and quick thinking allowed him to stay one step ahead of their pursuers. Valora, though weak, matched his pace as best as she could, her determination fueling her movements. As they neared the artifact again, Kaeldrak stepped into their path, his massive frame blocking their way. He swung a colossal blade at Ryan, forcing him to dive out of the way. You can't win, human! Kaeldrak snarled. You're just delaying the inevitable. Ryan rolled to his feet, his sidearm raised. I've been delaying the inevitable my whole life. Why stop now? He fired several shots, but Kaeldrak's armor absorbed the impact. The warlord lunged at him, his blade slicing through the air with terrifying speed. Ryan dodged and countered, using his smaller size and agility to stay out of reach. It was a brutal, high-stakes dance of survival. Meanwhile, Valora crawled toward the artifact, her hands trembling as she reached for the interface panel. The artifact began to respond to her touch, its glow intensifying. Kaeldrak noticed her movement and roared in fury. You dared defile the artifact with your tainted hands? Ryan stepped between them, blocking Kaeldrak's path. You're not touching her. The warlord swung his blade again, and this time, it connected with Ryan's arm, sending his sidearm clattering to the ground. Blood seeped from the wound, but Ryan didn't back down. Instead, he grabbed a shard of broken crystal from the floor and drove it into Kaeldrak's side. The warlord bellowed in pain, staggering back. Ryan used the moment to retrieve his weapon and fire at the ceiling above Kaeldrak. The weakened stone collapsed, burying the warlord under a pile of rubble. Ryan! Valora called out, her voice filled with urgency. The artifact is fully active, but I need more time to override its control protocols. Ryan nodded, wiping the blood from his face. You've got it. I'll keep them off you. The remaining Vector soldiers regrouped, their weapons trained on Ryan. He took cover behind a pillar, exchanging fire with them in a desperate attempt to buy Valora the time she needed. The air was thick with the sound of energy blasts and the acrid smell of burning stone. Almost there, Valora said, her fingers flying over the artifact's interface. Kaeldrak, battered but not defeated, emerged from the rubble, his rage palpable. You think you can stop me? He roared. I am the conqueror of worlds! He charged at Valora, but Ryan intercepted him, tackling the massive alien with every ounce of strength he had left. They grappled fiercely, the warlord's superior strength nearly overwhelming Ryan. But Ryan fought with a determination born of sheer willpower, refusing to let Kaeldrak reach Valora. With a final surge of effort, Ryan used a small explosive from his pack, planting it on Kaeldrak's armor and shoving him backward. The explosion sent the warlord flying, incapacitating him. Valora cried out as the artifact emitted a blinding light. I've done it! The artifact is fully under my control! The chamber trembled as the artifact unleashed a wave of energy, disabling the weapons of the Vector soldiers and forcing them to retreat. Kaeldrak, realizing he was outmatched, glared at Ryan and Valora with seething hatred. This isn't over, he growled before retreating with his forces. As the dust settled, Ryan collapsed to the ground, his body battered and bleeding. Valora crawled to his side, her hands shaking as she cradled his head. You saved me, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Ryan managed a weak smile. I wasn't about to let you handle this alone. The artifact's glow began to stabilize, and Valora felt a surge of strength returning to her body. The virus within her was neutralized, its effects reversing as the artifact's energy coursed through her. She looked down at Ryan, her eyes filled with gratitude. We did it, she whispered. Together. Ryan chuckled softly, despite the pain. Yeah, not bad for a human and a queen. As the chamber fell silent, the two of them shared a moment of quiet triumph. But in the shadows, a new threat loomed, a hidden enemy who had been watching their every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Their fight was far from over. The chamber was still, the artifact's radiant glow casting long shadows across the carved stone walls. Ryan lay motionless on the cold floor, his injuries severe but not fatal. Queen Velora, now standing tall with her strength fully restored, knelt by his side. Her violet eyes, once dim with exhaustion, now burned with determination. The artifact had done more than cure her. It had awakened a power within her, a connection to the Zythan technology that pulsed across the galaxy. Ryan, she said softly, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. You can't stop now. We need to finish this. Ryan groaned, his eyes fluttering open. The sight of Velora standing over him was enough to reignite his spirit. You look better, he muttered, managing a weak smile. Thanks to you, Velora replied, helping him to sit up. But Kaeldrak won't give up so easily. He'll regroup and come back stronger. We have to stop him before he can use the virus against Earth. Ryan nodded, gritting his teeth as he pushed himself to his feet. His body protested every movement, but his resolve was unshaken. What's the plan? Velora gestured toward the artifact. With its power, I can interface with the Zythan tech network. I can disable the Vector fleet orbiting this planet and render their weapons useless. But it will take time, and Kaeldrak won't sit idly by. Ryan tightened his grip on his sidearm. Then I'll buy you that time. Velora hesitated, her expression conflicted. You've already risked so much. And I'm not stopping now. Ryan interrupted. You focus on the fleet. I'll handle the ground. Their eyes met, and for a moment, words were unnecessary. Velora saw in Ryan the same unyielding courage that had brought him to her aid in the first place. He wasn't just a medic, he was a warrior, one who fought with his heart as much as his skills. As Velora began her work, Ryan prepared for the inevitable. The artifact chamber's defenses had activated, sealing the main entrance and forcing the Vector forces to breach it manually. He could hear the distant sound of their cutting tools, the high-pitched whine growing louder with each passing second. Ryan took cover behind a pillar, his weapon at the ready. He had rigged the chamber with makeshift traps using components from his medkit and scavenged materials from the ruins. They weren't much, but they would have to do. The breach came suddenly, the heavy metal doors exploding inward with a deafening roar. Vector soldiers poured into the chamber, their weapons trained on Ryan. He opened fire, his shots precise and calculated. The first wave fell quickly, but more took their place. Ryan's traps slowed their advance. An improvised tripwire detonated, sending shrapnel into the advancing troops. A second trap, a timed flashbang, blinded and disoriented another group. Despite the odds, Ryan held his ground, his training and resourcefulness keeping him one step ahead of the enemy. You've got this, Velora, he muttered under his breath, his focus unwavering. Just keep going. Meanwhile, Velora's connection to the artifact deepened. Her fingers danced across the interface, the glowing panels responding to her touch with a symphony of lights and sounds. She could feel the Zythan network opening to her, its vast array of systems ready to obey her commands. Almost there, she murmured, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. The artifact's energy surged, and Velora's mind expanded beyond the confines of the chamber. She could see the Vector fleet in orbit, their ships bristling with weapons aimed at the planet below. With a single thought, she began disabling their systems, one ship at a time. Kaeldrak stormed into the chamber, his massive frame a dark silhouette against the glowing artifact. His red eyes blazed with fury as he surveyed the scene. Ryan stood his ground, his weapon raised. You again, Kaeldrak growled, his voice dripping with contempt. I should have killed you when I had the chance. Ryan smirked, his exhaustion hidden behind a mask of defiance. Guess you're not as good at this as you think. Kaeldrak roared and charged, his massive blades slicing through the air. Ryan dodged, narrowly avoiding the strike. The two clashed in a brutal melee, Kaeldrak's strength pitted against Ryan's speed and ingenuity. Despite his injuries, Ryan fought with relentless determination. He used every trick he knew, exploiting Kaeldrak's size and overconfidence. He dodged, parried, and counterattacked, his movements fueled by sheer willpower. "You're a fool to think you can stop me!" Kaeldrak bellowed, his blade carving through a pillar. "Maybe," Ryan replied, his voice steady despite the pain. "But I'm not stopping until you're down." The fight reached its climax as Ryan, out of options and nearly out of strength, grabbed a shard of the artifact that had fallen during the battle. The shard pulsed with energy, its power resonating through him as he plunged it into Kaeldrak's chest. The warlord let out a guttural roar, his massive form collapsing to the ground. Ryan stood over him, breathing heavily, his vision swimming from exhaustion and blood loss. With Kaeldrak defeated, the remaining Vector soldiers hesitated. Their leader was gone, and their weapons were failing, thanks to Velora's control of the artifact. One by one, they began to retreat, their morale shattered. Velora's voice echoed through the chamber, calm and commanding. "The fleet is neutralized. The battle is over." Ryan staggered toward her, his legs threatening to give out. Velora caught him, her arms strong and steady. For the first time, he allowed himself to relax, the weight of the fight lifting from his shoulders. "You did it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "No," Velora replied, her gaze softening. "We did it." The aftermath was a blur. Velora used the artifact's power to send a signal across the galaxy, calling for peace and unity among the warring factions. Her message was clear: the cycle of violence had to end. The Vector fleet, now leaderless and defenseless, withdrew, leaving Zithron Prime in peace for the first time in years. Velora's strength and leadership inspired not only her people but also the neighboring civilizations, many of whom pledged their support to rebuild what had been lost. Ryan, his wounds treated and his strength returning, stood beside Velora as she addressed her people. The once fractured Zythan Empire began to heal, its citizens rallying behind their queen. In the quiet moments that followed, Ryan and Velora found themselves alone in the artifact chamber, the glow of the ancient device casting a warm light over them. "You could have left," Velora said, her tone soft but serious. "You could have walked away, but you stayed." Ryan shrugged, a small smile playing at his lips. "Guess I'm not great at walking away from people who need help." Velora stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "You're more than that, Ryan. You're extraordinary." Ryan chuckled, though his expression grew serious. "Takes one to know one." For a moment, the weight of their shared experiences hung between them, unspoken but deeply felt. Velora reached out, her hand brushing against his. "You've given me more than my life," she said. "You've given me hope." Ryan met her gaze, his own emotions mirrored in her eyes. "And you've given me a reason to believe in something bigger than myself." Their connection, forged in the crucible of battle and sacrifice, was undeniable. Together, they stood as a symbol of what could be achieved through courage, compassion, and unity. As they left the chamber, the artifact's glow dimmed, its purpose fulfilled. But its legacy, like theirs, would endure, lighting the path toward a brighter future.